We've called the special budget meeting to order, and at this time I'll ask you to stand, and we'll ask Commissioner Langley if he'll ask the invocation, and I'll lead in the pledge.
Let us pray. Eternal God, our Father, we are grateful and thankful for excuse me, this opportunity to come together to debate the financial situation of this county and to do what's right and pleasing in thy sight concerning thy people. Father, help us to have understanding and compassion for your people. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At this time, I'll turn it over to the county manager, Brian Alligator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Just a brief update on the way the night will kind of go for us. I'll give you the manager's message for the budget. Anita's going to go into some depth on the revenue side of it, and then I'll finish up with some detail on the expenditure side. So at your places, you have the binder, which contains the budget, the recommended budget for this year. And it is my pleasure to present to you the manager's budget message for the 17-18 fiscal year recommended budget. As you are aware, and as we've done before, that binder contains the fiscal year 17-18 recommended annual budget as required by North Carolina General Statute 159 and the North Carolina Local Budget Fiscal and Control Act. There are three sections in the budget. First is the section that provides for the continuation funds for all the services and narrative descriptions of the programs and services that this board has authorized for this fiscal year. It is put in there in a manner such that it describes the cost centers so that people both understand where the money is going and where the funds are being expended. The second section shows 34 general fund and 2 enterprise fund service expansions. Those essentially are new or different services that have been requested either by departments that are not what you're doing this year, or maybe new or different. So we pull them out and show them as service expansions. Or it may be outside agencies who are either requesting additional money than they got last year, or it may be outside agencies that are requesting funding this year that did not get funding last year. And then the third section in your book is simply the fee manual. And of course, the fee manual is in there for you to review and approve. And what it's is set there to do is to try to recover cost of specific services that we provide instead of spreading that across general tax dollars. Again, the process of budget preparation is pretty much a year-round process, but it officially begins in January of 17 this year with the board's planning retreat. As you recall, during that planning retreat session, we discussed with you where we were with the budget and asked for your feedback on programs and services that you wanted us to continue and any new ones that you wanted us to look at. Budget packages were distributed to departments and outside agencies in late January, and they were returned to the Finance Department in early March. We had individual department meetings in late March and early April where we sat down, the finance officer and I sat down with department heads individually, went through their budgets line item by line item, and looked at historic trends, looked at actual expenditures, and looked at what was projected to roll up at the end of the year and where they felt like they needed to be, as well as what it would take to continue the services that they had been providing in the new year. Revenues are the last items that are addressed simply because of the way it's structured. We don't get final business personal tax returns filings in until the 15th. They're not due until the 15th of April, so it pushes us a little back to get our revenue stream to make sure that that's as good as we can get it. With the 15th falling on a Saturday this year, it pushed it back to the 17th. So that's why we actually asked you to give us a little more time, because the more we can have hard numbers on our revenue side, the better off we are. We try to take as much guesswork out of the budget as we can. So that allowed us a little more time to get more of those revenue numbers in as they were being filed by businesses. There are still some out there, and the tax assessor's office is still putting some of those in, I'm sure, but we have to draw a line at some point and say this is where we're stopping and these are the revenues we're going to work from. And anything above that is always a plus for us. So it's being presented tonight, and the public hearing is scheduled at your next regular meeting, which is June the 12th. That's 1 week back. Y'all made a change in your regular meeting. And it is anticipated that the budget will be adopted at a special called meeting on June 19th. And of course, you know that the budget has to be adopted by June 30th, unless you want to do one of those crazy things of doing like a continuing resolution. I think there are actual ways to do that, but I don't think it's something you want to do. So June 30th is where we're looking to roll up at. Of course, the goals of this budget, as always, like we talked about last year, were to rely on financial plans and systems in preparation of the proposed budget, and to conservatively estimate our revenues and expenditures in an effort to avoid expectations of performance that are not realistic. So we spend a lot of time looking at those revenues and then looking at our models to make sure that we have the best information we can. We also try to create an atmosphere for our department heads and throughout the county that there's not an effort to spend down funds at the end of the year. That's not what we want to do. We want to use the funds that we need to provide the services, but we certainly don't want to spend them down just because we have them. Also, our goal is to present a budget that reevaluates all expenditures and allows for policy review and potential service reductions or expansions based on your policy directives. We spend a lot of time looking at those expenditures, making sure that they are where we think they should be, and then this gives you the opportunity to direct us in policy. And then, of course, to provide an analysis of county government cost centers in order to more clearly demonstrate where those general tax fund dollars are being spent and where those services are being provided. The budget is not just a financial document, it's an educational document. It is intended to be a document in which people who may not understand all the ins and outs of county government can go to that document and not only see what funds are being expended in those programs, but what actually those programs do. So that is a big part of it. So, a general overview of the budget. And again, I'll kind of go a general overview. Then I'll talk a little bit about big picture on revenues. Won't steal too much of Anita's thunder on that. And then I'll talk big picture on the expenditure side. And then again, once I'm finished with that, Anita will talk in detail more about the revenues, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail about the expenditures. So the recommended, the big picture is the recommended budget maintains the county's ad valorem tax rate at 55 cents per 100 of assessed valuation. That is the same as it was last year. There is no recommended tax increase. At that assumed collection rate, it will generate approximately $32.3 million in property tax revenue. This is an increase of a little over $500,000 from prior years based on new property growth in the county of a little over $75 million. The recommended budget maintains all county services and programs provided in the prior year, but does make 2 increases in programs that were previously approved by the Board of Commissioners. Those 2 programs are the Emergency Medical Services Program was increased to include a paramedic level unit at the Old Ford Fire Department to provide service in the Washington Township. And then the Health Department services were increased to provide state-mandated health services at the detention facility. As you recall, inmate medical services in this fiscal year were being provided by an outside contractor. The recommended budget does propose a financed capital package of $3 million to help the county catch up on much-needed building and infrastructure projects. These projects are for general county facilities as well as school system and community college projects. The financing that we anticipate is based on a 10-year term at a 3% rate using asset security as allowed under North Carolina General Statute 168-20, what we typically refer to as 168 financing. The new debt service needed for this package is included in the continuation budget. So the new debt service is included in the continuation budget, and it is more than offset by the debt service payments that will end in fiscal year 17-18. The school system has a bond that rolls off in 17-18, and you've also are in the process of refinancing a school bond, and both of those costs will well exceed the new debt service that comes on board as part of this proposed debt package. And I'll talk a little bit more in detail later about what that debt package includes. The 17-18 recommended operating budget, and this is the operating budget, doesn't include the debt, doesn't include the $3 million in one-time capital expenditures, but it does include the finance piece, the debt service piece. So all of that, the operational piece of this, not just the one-time $3 million, is $393,893, or 0.7% less than the original budget from this current year. So looking apples to apples, the original budget that was adopted this year, 16-17, this recommended budget is almost $400,000 less. The recommended budget increases current expenses for the Beaufort County Community School System by $286,000, or 2%. That's in their current expense. Capital outlay funding is recommended at the same level it was last year, which was $990,695. Now, of the capital outlay funding, $659,700 is what we've included in the county's capital financing package, with the remainder $330,995 being provided to the school system in cash capital. Now, when you look at these calculations that we've shown, we've based our calculations on the adopted 16-17 budget. So those numbers may not look exactly the same as the school's budget, because last year you gave them the flexibility to move money from their current or from their capital money into their current expense. So they moved some of that around. Ours are based on original to original recommended. The recommended budget for the community college system increases their current expense funding by $141,874, or about 5.9%. Again, with this one, capital outlay funding is recommended at $282,000, which is an increase of $143,000 from the prior year. Of the capital funding, 165 is included in the financing package, and 118 is provided to the college in cash. And again, these are the same calculations because last year y'all gave them that budget flexibility to kind of move money between current expense and debt or in capital. The recommended budget also increases funding to the Beaufort Area Transit System, or BATS, as they're commonly referred to, in the amount of $52,500. This is part of a 2-year equal adjustment proposal that we've put in the budget, and that increase will help fully fund the public transportation system over 2 budget cycles in order to eliminate the subsidy that has been provided by the Beaufort County Developmental Center. I think, as you recall, the director came and gave you a presentation on that and talked about how the Bcbc was actually subsidizing a piece of BATS to the tune of about $105,000, and that they needed to get back to their core function of providing services to developmentally challenged individuals that Bcbc does, and not use those funds to help offset and provide a subsidy for BATS. As part of a negotiation we had with them, we told them that we didn't feel like we could do all that in 1 year, and we asked them could we spread that over 2, and of course they said that anything we could do to help them. So we've proposed that as a 2-year funding package. The recommended budget increases the service tax in the EMS District 02, which is the Old Ford Cherry Run area or the Washington Township, by ½ cent, from 4.5 to 5 cents, which is part of the EMS expansion that was previously approved by the board. And the recommended budget appropriates $394,381 in general fund balance. This is a decrease of $525,594 from the prior year. And this appropriation is intended to be non-recurring, as the final debt service payment on the Series 2006 General Obligation School Bonds will occur in 17-18, and those funds will more than offset the fund balance appropriation. So just overview of the general fund. On the expenditure side, again, the recommended general fund budget for the upcoming year is $56,386,892. When you include the one-time financing package, it takes it to $59 million from $56 million. That's the additional $3 million. Now, in the operational side, of course, what we present to you is that we don't include that one-time financing when you're looking apples to apples. We do include the debt service, the additional debt service, so you see that in the continuation. But on our percentage numbers, we're not showing that because that's one time. On the revenue side, just a high-level overview on that. Again, the tax rate is recommended to remain at 55 cents per $100 of valuation. The total taxable valuation for the county is about $5.9 billion, near about $6 billion. That's up. And it's made up of about $5.5 billion in real and personal property and $452 million in motor vehicles. Collections for real and personal property taxes are assumed at 97.87% and 99.6% for motor vehicles, and that is out of the audited number from the prior fiscal year. That's what we're required to do, so that you don't overestimate your collections. You look at what the auditor said your actual collections were, and we use that number moving forward, and that changes every year. Just as a note, the real and personal collection rate is up 0.55%, so a little over 0.5%. From the prior audited statement, while the motor vehicle collection rate remains about the same. Now, and when you think about that, 0.5% on those values is pretty significant. So that's a really good effort by the collections department in making sure those funds are collected. The 99.6% for motor vehicles, as y'all recall, before the tax and tag program went in, that was usually about 87%. So one of the best days of work that the Association of County Commissioners and the League of Municipalities did when they worked together to get that tax and tag program in place. The estimated total taxable valuation is up approximately $75 million from last fiscal year, and it's mostly driven by business and personal property listings. Again, we talked about the $3 million proposed financing package, which is based on a 10-year term at 3% interest, with those proceeds going to one-time capital. You're aware that the county is scheduled for a reevaluation in 2018. You have a table that shows the reevaluation schedule and where the tax rates historically were for the county based over that 8-year period. So last revaluation cycle in year 8, which is where we are right now, your tax rate is 55 cents. And back in year 8 of reevaluation, last time you did that in 2009, 2010, your tax rate was 60 cents. The next section talks about the sales assessment ratio study that is done each year by the North Carolina Department of Revenue, and it is used to equalize public service company property valuations. We don't set those; the Department of Revenue sets those. So they do a formula that looks at the sales assessment ratio to determine how they need to adjust those. They look at sales transactions from the prior year to determine that ratio, and ratios greater than 1 indicate that the assessed values are greater than the market values. So if it's above 1, what's out there, what you have assessed is higher than what the current market is selling for. If a ratio is below 1, then your assessed value is below what the market is selling for. So what you do then is you multiply that ratio times your rate, and it gives you an effective tax rate. And that effective tax rate allows you to look across the counties and kind of determine how you rank across the state with other counties. So using the ratio that we have, which is 106.14, which essentially means our assessed valuation is 6% higher than what the market is actually selling at right now. So you multiply that times our 55-cent tax rate, and because our rate is higher than our assessed rate is actually higher, our assessed valuation is actually higher than what the market is selling for, it bumps your tax rate up to give you a higher effective tax rate. So our current tax rate is 55 cents, but based on the sales ratio, our effective rate is 58.38 cents, so 3 cents up. However, looking at that, looking at those effective rates, Beaufort County ranks the 33rd lowest among all 100 counties in property taxes. There are 67 counties with higher effective tax rates than Beaufort County and 32 counties that have lower tax rates. In your chart, you will see the surrounding counties around us, their tax rate, their ratio, their effective rate, and where they rank across the state as compared to the rest of the 100 counties. At the top of that list, obviously, you see Washington County. They're ranked 14th, and all the way down to Craven, which is 79th. But we are third from the bottom there in that group, and again, we are the 33rd lowest among all 100 counties. Sales tax revenues are up in the current fiscal year, mostly based on, well, a couple things. There's been some growth. Folks are feeling a little more confident about the economy. That means that it's equating to feeling better about their disposable income and spending some of that. But also there is the broadening and the additional base at which the General Assembly has changed the sales tax. So there are more things now that are being taxed. There's some labor services now that are being taxed, and that helps the growth. There's also, based on the information we're receiving from the association, they are projecting an increase in sales tax of about 4.25%. So we have plugged that number in as a growth factor for us. But again, those numbers are historic in nature. We use them since we don't get the actual, we just get the round number when it comes in, what article it comes from. We don't get the details, the heavy details on that. So we rely upon the historical trends on what that rate looks like and what it equates to for us. So when they change it, it takes us a little while to get back to baseline so we can estimate a little better. But again, our numbers are a little bit up, and the association is telling us that we ought to project about 4.25% higher. Intergovernmental revenues are estimated to be slightly lower when compared to last year. That includes our FEMA reimbursement that's in there, so even including that, they're still going to be down a little bit. And that's mostly due to lower anticipated federal and state grant funding. But of course, throughout the year, those state and federal numbers are subject to change as they refine those numbers and as they provide more through those programs. And we've seen that as you watch that number throughout this year, it has gone up based on additional funding for those programs. Licensing fees and other general fund revenues show a slight increase from the prior year, but really are essentially flat. When you remove the $3 million financing package from that, because we have to show that, it is an expenditure, so we actually have to show the $3 million on the expenditure side, and we show the proceeds coming in on the revenue side. But on that, when you take that out, and then you also remove the revenue or the expenses that will come from the elections department. You have a municipal election this year, so that drives up the cost of the elections. There is a revenue offset for that. So when you take both of those out, essentially the license and fees revenue are flat. Investment earnings are projected to increase due to a change in the county's investment portfolio that occurred this year. Anita and her staff watched that very carefully and have made some changes within the confines of what we're allowed to do. Obviously, the Local Government Commission doesn't allow us to be in risky investments, but it does allow us to be in some that will generate a little more interest than others. And Anita has done a great job in making sure that we're in the best money situation we can be with our idle funds. And of course, you're aware that from published reports, the Fed obviously raised their benchmark short-term rate by a quarter percentage point, and according to published reports, they are on track to do 2 more of those increases in 17 and then 3 in 18. So the anticipation is that you will see rates move up a little bit, which in turn helps us with our idle funds. The recommended budget appropriates $394,000 in general fund balance, or 0.7% of the general fund expenditures. And again, we've talked about that in that we anticipate that being a one-time expenditure because your debt service that is rolling off will more than cover that additional expenditure. As of June 30th, 16, the unassigned general fund balance was a little over $18 million, or 31.29% of expenditures. At close of 16-17 this year, we anticipate that being about $14.8 million, or 25.21% of expenditures. And then looking forward, based on the budget, and assuming in the budget that all the revenues come in and all the expenditures go out, we're estimating the unassigned general fund balance at that time to be 14.5, or 25.72% of expenditures. You will see the pie chart on page 5 there that shows your revenue side. Again, property taxes about 58.7% of your revenues are made up of property taxes. The next largest comes in at 20%, which is the restricted and intergovernmental, and then your sales and other taxes at about 15.9. That number from property taxes, if you look back over the last 10 years, you will have seen that pie chart grow. The cost burden has been shifted to counties. There was open discussion several years ago in the General Assembly that county tax rates were too low and that counties were holding on to too much money in their fund balances and that they ought to spend it or they ought to raise taxes if they needed to do things. So the General Assembly was pushing programs down and saying, you're going to pay for these now. So if you look back over time, you will see that piece of pie get larger and larger as that burden is pushed down, both from the federal side and from the state side to the local governments. On the expenditure side, just looking broadly at the different cost centers, the general government cost center, which excludes the debt service and transfers from other funds, so we're looking at apples to apples, is decreased by about 0.5% from last year. There are some individual departments in there, and we'll go into those in a bit, that have had some ups and downs. The human services cost centers have decreased by about 3.5%, and that was driven by an 8.3% decrease in social services. The remaining departments in there actually had increases. Obviously, the health department had an increase due to the jail health program, but that also has an offsetting revenue side. And then, as I talked about earlier, the BATS funding, which is the program 2-year adjustment to help with paying for the public transportation system. So when all that's said and done and rolled in, those departments still are down because that's a pretty significant decrease in social services, are still down 3.5%. The community services cost centers are down overall about 3.9%. All of those departments had decreases except for economic development, which economic development was held flat. Education cost centers, again, we talked about that earlier, that the school system in the funding piece was about 2% up on the current expense, and then the capital outlay was at the same amount, the same overall amount as it was last year, but there's a difference in the financed piece and the cash capital piece. Same with the community college system. In the changes there. Public safety cost centers, expenditures in that cost center are up overall by about $563,000, or about 5.2%. The sheriff's office, as part of that increase, is 3.2% from last year, and the majority of that increase is related to the capital expenditures for vehicles. This budget recommends funding the replacement of 10 vehicles in the sheriff's office for fiscal year 17-18 and keeping that at a constant replacement number for future budgets. From our side, I think the sheriff's office has high 60s, 70 vehicles or so, and to put them on a 10-year cycle where they're able to replace those vehicles every 6 to 7 years based on numbers of miles, it is pretty consistent number for us, and it helps us in our budgeting process. We like to see flat numbers so that we know we're budgeting this amount each year instead of having a number that's way up here this year and way down this year. We just don't like to see those ups and down spikes. So it helps us, and that's why we've recommended to you that you plug that number at 10 vehicles and continue that throughout the upcoming budgets. EMS in your chart shows a pretty substantial increase, and that is from the expansion into the Washington Township that was previously approved. And then the emergency management shows an increase of 52%. That's not really it's an increase in the budget, but it's not an increase overall, simply because we moved. There's a little bit of an increase in part-time salaries there, but the big change in the increase was we moved the emergency services director. That position was previously the EMS director's position, and when the EMS director left, we recategorized that position and moved it over to the emergency services, and we moved it into the emergency management budget line item. So that's where that big shift in dollars came. It's not a new position, it's the same position we had before, it's just been recategorized. And then there is some additional part-time funding that we put in the emergency management budget to help us close out some of the hazard mitigation projects that we have in play right now. We've got several of those going on, and to be able to continue that work and make sure that we're able to close those out and get those done, we felt like we needed just a little bit of part-time work to be able to bring some previous experience back in to help us do that. Overall, you will see that on the big picture of your budget, 33% of it is education, 32% of it is human services, and 21% of it's public safety. Everything else kind of wraps up the rest. 11% general government, 3% community services. But those are the big three, and those typically are always the big three. Education's always the biggest in pretty much every county government, and human services falls behind that, and typically public safety is right at the heels. You have two enterprise funds. You had one last year, and we moved the solid waste into an enterprise fund, pulled it out of the general fund last year. So those enterprise funds are operated as business-like funds, where the revenues and the fees that are paid for it are essentially cordoned off to pay for just the expenses of that. So you're not using tax dollars in a broad method. You're using actual revenues that come from those services to pay for those services. So there are no general fund tax dollars that go to either one of these. The water fund budget is recommended at $7.3 million. That's 2.73 greater than the prior year, and includes the following things. There is still this is the last year, or this is the next to the last year, of the 3% rate increase across all the districts. As you recall, the board directed that increases of 3% occur each year until 2018, so this is the last year, based on the system's debt load, and that was because of the way the debt in those districts is laddered. You knew you had a lower debt payment, and then the debt payments were ramping up, so you had to put in place some additional revenues to cover those. The debt service from 16-17 to 17-18 increased by $454,000, and expenditures in the amount of $334,500 recommended for capital. Now, there's an estimated $530,000 that's added into the fund balance reserve for the water fund, and that is used to help pay that future debt service and to stabilize those future rate increases. The solid waste fund, which we had a lot of discussion about last budget year, is recommended at $3.2 million. That's a little right at 0.5% greater than the prior year. The $145 fee per year for solid waste is recommended to stay the same. There is a recommendation of replacing a scale house out at the landfill. That is included in the debt package, and there is a transfer of funds from the solid waste back into the general fund to pay its portion of the debt service for that piece. So it's carrying its own weight. And then there is some contingency recommended in the solid waste fund. So overall, as you well know, we continue to face many challenges, both in this current fiscal year and in the upcoming fiscal year. The recommended budget continues county-provided services and operations and expands services in two areas that were previously approved by the board, and does all this with maintaining the current ad valorem rate of 55 cents per 100. As you know, many of the services and programs provided by counties are mandated, and there's a constant challenge to provide those services and programs with decreasing revenue streams. State and federal programs increase service mandates without providing sufficient funding sources. The burden of providing those services then shifts locally generated revenues. With this shift comes the struggle to continue to provide existing service levels that educate our children, ensure our health and safety, and provide a safety net for those in need, and improve the quality of life for those in dire situations. And of course, there are no easy answers when it comes to debating those policy matters. As you well know, the local and state economies in this upcoming year will be a very important factor in the performance of this budget. Eastern North Carolina, as well as Beaufort County, is continuing to recover and struggle through the devastating effects of the Great Recession. We have been fortunate, and then we've seen a slight increase in our revenue generation. This budget anticipates that increase will continue at a slow but steady rate, and although this is a good sign, Beaufort County still has a long way to go to recover. The actions of the General Assembly will also play a critical role. As the state debates the funding role it should play in areas of education, social services, and public health. As it has historically occurred, this budget is being submitted and debated before the General Assembly has finished its budget. This time difference forces the board to anticipate changes from the state level that have not been finalized, and unfortunately makes for some uncertainty in your determinations of the budget moving forward. But that is the schedule we work under, and it's what we have to do. Obviously, putting together a budget is a tremendous effort. Chief Financial Officer Anita Radcliffe, along with new Finance Department members Aaron Cutler and Jennifer Hopkins, did an outstanding job of helping create an informative and functional document that serves as a management tool and an outline from which to debate policy. I'm extremely thankful for their many long hours and hard work. They spent a lot of time, and I really appreciate that. Also, many thanks to Deputy Finance Director Sharon Rose and the rest of the Finance Department for making sure that the financial operations of the counties continued without a glitch as we all struggle through the budget process. Things don't stop during the budget process. We're doing multiple things at one time, and the rest of the county operations have to go on. And folks out of the administrative office and out of the finance office made sure those things went on, because a lot of us were tied up and out and away working on budget. Department managers also did an outstanding job of analyzing and compiling budgets that met the expectations they were given. When we started early last year talking about this year's budget, and we talked early on about this had to be a flat budget and that there wasn't room for growth and we were going to have to be as tight as we could be. And they did an absolutely outstanding job of bringing back budget requests that met that. We are less than where we were last year, and we've expanded 2 programs that were under the direction of the board. So they brought back in budgets that they understood where we needed to be, and they did a great job in doing that. So they deserve many thanks and tremendous admiration for the job they do. I want it to be known that it is my belief that people that work in local government are really truly special people. They care about their community, and they take pride in providing services to make a better life for other people that they serve. And I want you to know that I'm grateful to have the privilege to work for them and to work for you. And that is the submission of our budget message. Anita is going to talk to you in detail about the revenue side, and then I will get back up and talk to you a little bit about the expenditure side. So I will turn it over to Anita.
Good evening, gentlemen. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening to give you a broad overview on our projected revenues for next year. And this is a hugely important component to the entire budgeting process. I think a lot of times we focus very strongly on the expenditure piece, but you really got to nail down your revenues so you'll know that you've got sufficient income coming in during the year to cover your expenditures. And if you don't, then you need to know about that ahead of time so you can know if you need to spend fund balance and what that amount will be, so there won't be any surprises when you get to the end of the year. So I'm actually going to be working from a couple of different areas in the budget. The first is on page 19 of your budget book, which is a summary of revenues for the general fund. And then also in the interior front pocket of your budget book, you will see a 13-page spreadsheet that is a detailed listing of every line item for every general fund revenue. And these 2 documents, the detailed document, the spreadsheet, and the summary on page 19, they correlate together. They just roll up. This detailed, big, long spreadsheet rolls up into this summary on page 19. So you can follow whichever one you want. I will spend more time going through the detail sheet because that's what I've spent weeks working on, and that's what I'm really familiar with. But when you sit down with your book next week before we get back to our next meeting, it may be helpful that you focus on page 19 through 22 in your book, just to kind of get a summary overview of the revenues by major source. So on that big spreadsheet, the first, of course, item we have is ad valorem taxes, and that is the major revenue for the general fund. It accounts for about 56% of our revenue. And on page 3, you'll notice the highlighted amount of $33,107,096. That is what we're anticipating our revenue to be for ad valorem taxes next year, and that's an increase of about $330,000 over the current year. So like Brian said in his message earlier, we have experienced some growth from year to year, and from tax levy 15-year to 16-year, we experienced growth in the amount of 1.27%, and we're budgeting growth in the amount of 1.2% for next year. So when it comes to revenues, we like to be very conservative. It's likely to be, and hopefully will be, slightly higher than that. But we've worked through our model that we have, and you also have a copy of that. That's on a separate spreadsheet where we try to anticipate by the different tax types where we'll be with the assessed value. But we feel comfortable with budgeting a 1.2% increase for next year's ad valorem taxes. On page 4 at the top, highlighted number of $8.807 million. That's the county's next biggest, largest general fund revenue, our sales tax. And as Brian mentioned earlier, we rely on the association to give us a lot of guidance on where they think we're going to be with this number. And they've told us that they anticipate 4.25% next year in sales tax growth, which equates to about $400,000 additional dollars for us in revenue for next year. And that's a combination, as he mentioned, of actual, what I call true growth, and then the effect of the expanded tax base. Moving on down, we have other taxes and licenses. The $163,700, that is essentially flat for what we budgeted this year for items such as our beer and wine licenses and our gross receipts on leased vehicles. The next major category is other taxes and licenses. We've got that budgeted for next year at $559,000. That's going up by about $150,000, and that is due to the FEMA disaster payment that we're expecting next year from Hurricane Matthew. We're hoping that we'll get that reimbursement from FEMA next year for approximately $200,000. Thank you. The next several major revenue sources are our unrestricted and restricted intergovernmental revenues. This is where all the revenue for the health and DSS departments are accounted for. And honestly, I rely pretty much solely on those departments. I rely on Sonia and Jim to give me these revenue numbers because they are the ones that are intimately familiar with the different programs and how they are reimbursed from the federal and the state government. I can tell you that on average, we receive about 58% reimbursement from the federal and state government for DSS and health operations, and the county share is usually about 42% overall. And that brings us all the way over to page 9, where we have permit and fees at the very bottom at $321,500. And again, this is where we account for things such as inspection fees, marriage license, some of the register of deed fees, and we expect that to be flat. The current year revised budget for that was $328,000. We have $321,000 budgeted for those fees for next year. On page 11, we have our sales and services. We have several different revenues that are accounted for here. Some of the major ones are like our rental income. We have some of the miscellaneous user fees at the health department, and also the EMS franchise fees. Those are the major ones, and also the EMS medical services fees from where we do our EMS transports, and we get the reimbursements back from Medicaid and Medicare and the self-pays. They're all accounted for in this area of the revenues, and we expect them to essentially be flat from the current budget at $1.4 million. Same page going down just a bit, you have the investment earnings. We have increased that quite a bit. The current year budget for that is $15,000. We've increased that to $100,000, so that's up $85,000, and there's several reasons for that. Brian mentioned those already. First of all, we've gone through the exercise of looking at the funds that we have on hand, the idle funds, and we've invested those. And we also anticipate that interest rates will be increasing over the coming 12 months, which will obviously increase our investment earnings. And then the third thing is we've gone out for RFP on banking services. So right now, we're paying pretty significant fees on our banking services, and that gets netted against any earnings that we have. So last time I went out on RFP for banking services, we saved about $40,000 a year, and I'm hoping we can do the same here at the county. So that will have a good effect on that number too, and increase that number for us. If you go to the bottom of page 12, this is kind of our catch-all for anything else that's left. This is our miscellaneous revenue. That is actually down about $100,000, and the difference is in the current year, we budgeted for a public safety grant. That did not actually come to fruition for this year, and we don't expect, there is a possibility we may be getting one next year, but we're not going to budget for that unless we actually get awarded that grant at that time. That's when we'll budget for that. So when it's all said and done, on page 13, we've got a total projected revenue, including a $394,000 use of fund balance. That brings our total revenues to $56,386,892. And then, of course, we're anticipating doing a borrowing package. And so if you count the proceeds from that, that'll add an additional $3 million, bringing the grand total to the $59,386,000. Now, I know that's a lot of numbers, and you've just gotten this book today. You've not even had a chance to really look at it. So I welcome the opportunity when we meet back at our next meeting to try to answer any questions about these revenues once you've had a chance to go back through them. I do want to mention one other thing. If you will turn to page 23 of your budget document.
Page what?
Page 23. Just wanted to speak briefly about the available fund balance. I've had a couple of you ask me that. So this is really hard for us to estimate, and I can tell you why. Well, the major reason is you can get really close with your estimates and come within 2% of the number. You know, you can be at 98% on your estimates, and the 2% difference, well, on a $58 million budget, that's like $1.2 million. So when you're working with really big numbers, you can be really close, but still, if you're off a percent or two, it can have a really big impact. But we've done our best to try to look at where we think our revenues are going to be at June 30th, where our expenses are going to be at June 30th, and at June 30th, 2017, I'm projecting an unassigned fund balance of $14,897,346, which equates to 25.21%. Now, I'm hoping it's going to be a little better than that, and I think it probably will be. But again, you know, you've heard us say this over and over again. We like to be extremely conservative in our estimates. so that you don't get disappointed if it's lower, but you'll be happy if it's a little higher. So that's what I got for revenues. I think Brian's going to go into a little bit of detail on the expenditure side.
Just one thing, and I randomly picked page 142, which is animal control, but you can pick any department you want to pick and go to, like on page 141, you'll see animal control, you'll see the narrative, you'll see the contact information, you'll see the org chart, you'll see the full-time positions that are authorized starting back in fiscal year 13-14, all the way up to what's recommended. You'll see the breakdown as we roll it up under personnel, benefits, operating, capital outlay, and then total. And those go back fiscal year 15-16 all the way through 17-18 recommended. When you flip the page, page 142, you'll see the individual line items for that department or for that division for animal control. And Commissioner Richardson had asked us during budget time if we would add an additional actual. So you'll see we now have 5 years of numbers. You start back in 2014 actuals, so you have 2014 actuals, 2015 actuals, 2016 actuals, and then you have the 2017 original budget. That was what was adopted July 1 of 17 to move forward. July 1 of 16 to move forward. Then you have the 2017 revised budget. So if there were any changes in that budget throughout the year, whether are budget amendments that occurred, that's where we are now. And then you'll see the roll-up where it says 2017 estimate. That's the estimate that we anticipate how the year will roll up. Then you've got the 2018 fiscal year 2018 requested, that came in from the department heads, and then you have the 2018 recommended, which is what we've presented to you for your consideration. So just wanted to kind of give you that overview. Now, I am going to talk a little bit more in detail about the expenditure side, and I'll be working off of page 24, which is the summary of general fund expenditures. And so I'm going to kind of work through that at a high level, hit a couple of highlights for you, but as we get into your budget workshops next week, we will be doing individual departments. We'll go through each of those individual departments, talk about them. The department heads will be here to answer any questions that you may have. So we'll get in the weeds there if you want to. You have all the information to get you as deep into the weeds as you want to go. You also have all the information that rolls it up to let you look at a higher level as well. But so on page 24, starting at the top, this is the general fund, and starting at the governing body. And what you'll see there, we show you looking at this, what page it starts on, and then the actuals, the estimates. So the governing body piece is on page 29 of your budget book. You see the 15-16 actual expenditures in that first column. You see the 16-17 estimate. You see the 16-17 original, the revised, and then the 17-18 recommended. And then we give you two comparison columns. The first one is the percent change from the original to the recommended. And then the last column is the change from the amended to the recommended. So what we like to look at and what we think is an apples to apples comparison is the next to the last column. That percentage shows a comparison of the July 1/16 original budget to the July 1/17 recommended budget. So you're looking kind of apples to apples. The last column gives you where it is compared to any budget changes that have occurred throughout the year. So under governing body, so I'll be working off that next to the last column. Like I say, we like to work apples to apples, so that'll be the 16-17 original to 17-18 recommended. You'll see under governing body, where it shows an increase of 5.2%. Now, that's on a $391,000 budget, is up 5.2%. The majority of that increase is not new money. It's simply moving items that were in other departments back underneath the governing body. Things like, the big piece are like memberships. We missed a couple of the membership pieces, like the RPO. What traditionally has been under the board has been like NACO, Association of County Commissioners, those kind of membership organizations that the county as a whole are a member of. But the COG, the Council of Governments that you pay dues to, the RPO that you pay into, as well as chamber memberships. We actually had we were showing chamber memberships as outside agencies, and it's really a membership fee. You're paying dues to be a part of that. So we moved it back under the board, dues and memberships, because it is, the board represents the county as a whole, and that's a membership for the county as a whole. So that's really what all those changes are. There aren't any big changes in there. County administration is flat. It's zero. Finance is flat. It's just a 0.2 up. Human resources is up 4%. That is where we have pulled all of the drug testing for new employees and any randoms that we do back into HR, so that cost center is there. We had spread that out previously where we were charging that back to departments, and it just made sense for us to pull it back to a central point. So that's up. It is really not, I wouldn't consider it new money. We were paying for it. We were just paying for it out of different places. Tax assessor is down about 7%. There's some software that they're not having to pay for this year that has rolled off, so that has helped drop that budget. Tax collector is up 5.1%. That is directly related to the Zacchaeus tax collection assistance that you have, the legal assistance that you have, where for foreclosures, we have to budget that. We have to budget the cost of that. So it shows on the expenditure side, but you will also have that offset. Traditionally, or most of the time, you will have that revenue offset on the other side when they clear those properties. So that's the majority of the reason that is up, and it does have a revenue offset. Court facilities are down 9%. The reason that's down 9% is we pulled some of last year. We put some money in the court facilities to do some courthouse renovations. We pulled a little bit of that money out this year because under the debt package that we're proposing, there's a large amount. There's about $500,000 worth of work that's scheduled under the debt package. So that's the difference there. Under elections, it's up 24%. Again, that goes back to the municipal elections that will occur in this fiscal year that are paid for by the municipalities. We still have to show them on the expenditure side, but you will receive a revenue offset from the municipalities as they reimburse you for that. But it shows an increase because we have an increase in expenditures. Register of Deeds is up 7.5%. That's related to some automation funds that are set aside for the Register of Deeds to increase or to upgrade her automation products and to take care of those things. Again, there is a revenue offset with that. Every time you record a deed, there's a piece of that cost of that deed that goes into it by state law into that automation fund, which helps pay for that. But again, because we're spending more, even though we're getting that revenue offset, we have to show it on the expenditure side, which shows that going up. Maintenance buildings and grounds are down about 0.5%. That is also because we pulled some of those items that were originally under maintenance buildings and grounds in their budget. We've pulled some of those things out under the debt package. A lot of the roofing projects were pulled out, so that dropped that a bit. Debt service is up 11%. That accounts for that additional debt service that's coming in on that proposed borrowing package of $3 million. Non-departmental is down. That is the general piece that we're unable, that it just makes more sense for us to assign as a general instead of trying to try to individually allocate to each department, like postage, and things like our IT services, our overarching IT contract that services all of our folks. It's very difficult. It's too much time, and it's not worth the the cost is not worth the benefit for us to individually break those costs out, so we show them as a non-departmental charge. But that's down a little bit simply because we had some funding last year that we put in for the personnel salary study, the FLSA piece, and you'll see that presentation, the salary study presentation, you'll see at the June meeting. But those funds were expended this year and won't be in there again this year. Transfer to other funds, that is where, that's a 2.5 and it's down to 242. That's where we transferred funds out of the general fund, out of fund balance, to the radio project, about 1.2, 1.8.
And Courthouse Improvements.
All those get transferred out to capital project funds. So that's why you see that big decrease. So that's one of those things that if you decide in the middle of the fiscal year you want to do something different and pull it out of fund balance, then you will see that increase because we pull it out and put it into a capital project that will survive over multiple fiscal years. Contingency is the same. It's flat at $25,000. Social services, like I spoke about earlier, is down about 8%. They did a really good job this year of looking at their budget and looking at cost. And in the social services budget, like the health department budget, you have to be very, very careful where you go in and make cuts, because you can go in and make a cut and it can end up costing you county money. Or you can make a cut that just doesn't make sense because you're getting 90% money back from the federal government and it's only costing you, out of every $10, you're paying $1. Well, if you go in and cut it, it's really not saving you any money. It's not saving you any local county dollars, and you're losing federal dollars. So it takes a lot of work, and Sonia and her crowd did a really good job of looking at those expenditure items and looking at where there were some opportunities to make some reductions in specific county-funded dollars and not impact those state and federal dollars that come in on the other side. Health department's up, it's 11%, but again, that is what we talked about. That's the jail health piece. And that was approved by the board moving forward. Again, there is a revenue offset for that one as well. Jim committed to the board that in that program, it would essentially be flat, and they would offset those expenditures with on the revenue side to the tune of 150. 150. Is that right? 150. And so we feel good about that. Veterans assistance is up 2.2%. That's simply, and this is one of those departments. This is a one-person department. There's one person in that department. As you can see, the budget for that department is $59,000, and you look at it and you say it was up 2.2%. That is simply health insurance and retirement that's been bumped. The state retirement was bumped by quarter percent, state retirement, and health insurance was bumped by 6.96%. So when those things happen in very, very small departments, you just can't find any other place to squeeze. So that's where you see that bump just a little bit. Area mental health and transportation, 16.2% increase. Area mental health is the same. Area mental health did not change. They said, if you will send us what you sent us last year, we are good. So theirs is flat. The increase on that side, the 16% overall, is the increase that we programmed in for the public transportation. And again, that is programmed in at a 2-year piece. This will be the first year of it. And then we would anticipate that the board would fund that again next year to get them to a point where that program is essentially self-sustaining. Cooperative extension is down 14.9%. The reason that is down, the reason that shows down as much as it does, is you'll recall last year there were 2 vans that were in their budget that were purchased. One of those, and this is really where you have to remember the expenditure side and the revenue side. There was $60,000 of expenditures for 2 vans on the expenditure side for this. You expended $60,000 and bought 2 vans. Well, Potash gave you $30,000 for one of those vans, and it came in on the revenue side. But you still have to show all of the expense on the expense side. So when you pull those out this year, you see that decrease. Soil and water conservation was down 2.4%. Youth services was down 2.2%. That is mainly related to the additional one-time funding that occurred for a couple of the agencies last year in the youth services programs. You gave them the continuation piece, but then you gave them a little bump and said, this is a one-time expenditure for this year, and you won't get it next year. So as we do the budget, what we say is, what did you get last year unless it was a one-time? And then if it was a one-time, we don't put it back in there under continuation. So that's why you see a little bit of a decrease there, because there were a couple of those that got some one-time funding. Outside agencies is the same thing. You see that 2.2% decrease. That's because you had some outside agencies last year that you provided some one-time funding to, and that was taken out this year because it was one-time funding. Economic development, as I spoke earlier, is flat at 0. Planning is down 2%. The school system, now this is again one of those where it looks like you've made a cut to the school system because it shows minus 2.4%. Again, that goes back to their current expense, we bumped by 2%. And then the capital piece, we gave them the same amount of capital that they got last year. However, we pulled pieces out of it for us to finance. I've got that here. And what we looked at, and I'll kind of go into that for you, we looked at what were projects that they had submitted to you under their capital request that you had. And what of those projects did we feel like could be financed for 10 years? They told you initially up front that they were looking for 2 activity buses, which is going to cost them $178,000, and they said an activity bus will last us 18 years. Well, if they will last 18 years, it's something we can finance for 10. So that's part of it. We also pulled out, they asked that you consider a land purchase for some property that was adjacent to the Washington High School for a soccer complex. That was about $80,000. We pulled that out because that's obviously a one-time expenditure that's something that could be financed. We also pulled out $188,500 for their asphalt paving and parking improvements. We felt like that was something that would stand the test of time for 10 years. Their roofing projects as well, just like we're proposing to do some roofing projects in the capital borrowing package. Their roofing projects total about $213,200. So out of that was a total of $659,700. We pulled that out to finance that, and that's why you'll see that change, because they're getting what they get. They got 2% increase in their current expense, but they got less in their cash capital. We're financing the rest of it, so that's why it shows that going down a little bit, but it is not, that again is one of the math numbers. You can make them look however you want to. Community college is up 4.8%. That's one of those numbers as well. Actually, if you look at, we pulled out some of their larger stuff as well under their long-term capital. Several of their HVAC, their larger HVAC units, and the storage area they were looking to build, we pulled those out to finance those as well, which reduced their amount of capital. So you have a financed capital piece and you have a cash capital piece. And when you include that cash capital piece with the current expense piece, it makes it less than what they actually asked for on the percentage. Sheriff's Office is up 3.2%. Talked about that earlier. The majority of that, in fact, I ran the numbers. I want to say that the operational side of the Sheriff's Office was like $15,000 or $16,000 more from last year, which on that size of a budget is really, really good. The big piece of it was just the vehicle, and again, we programmed 10 vehicles in, and our goal would be to program that in for every year moving forward so that we get that nice consistent number in our budget numbers. The jail was down 1.7%. E911 communications was essentially flat, down just a touch at 0.2%. We won't call it flat, we'll call it going down. How about that? Emergency medical services was up 25%. Again, that's where we expanded, the board approved, and we expanded the EMS service in the Washington Township and put an ambulance at the old Ford Fire Station. So that shows that bump. There are revenue offsets that come with that as well. And then emergency management, 52.6%. I talked about that one earlier in my overview message. That is a little bit of a strange number in that we moved the position from EMS over to emergency management, and that changed the amount of money that was in that department. Again, we added a little bit of money for some part-time work to help us get through the mitigation efforts and close those grants out. Animal control is up 7.2%. That is mostly related to some additional part-time salary, and that was something that we screwed up last year when we went through the budget. It was our fault. And there was a service expansion request last year for a full-time animal control person, and when we were having the conversations, we had deducted some of that part-time out because of that, and it never got put back in. So they struggled this year, and were not able to do what they needed to do in providing some of those levels. So that's why that gets it back to where it should have been last year. And again, that I take responsibility for that one. Forestry Services is flat, and again, as long as we don't have a big fire, we're good there. They only charge us when they have to go do stuff. And then other emergency services is down 73%. That's the Washington Township contract. That's where that money flowed through, where you paid the city of Washington to cover that area. So that's a decrease there. That's where that came out of. So again, overall, when you look at the operational side and take out the $3 million in one-time capital expenditures proposed on the debt package, the budget is 0.7% less than this year's starting budget. So let's talk a little bit about the what's in what we're proposing to you in the financing piece, in the $3 million financing package. Of that, there are multiple roof projects, and of the $3 million over a 10-year term at about 3%. And again, our proposal is to use 168-20 financing, which is essentially asset financing, where it does not pledge the full faith and credit of the county. So it's not a GO bond, it's not a general obligation bond. It is what they commonly refer to as installment financing, where you pledge an asset. It's like your car. You borrow money on your car, and if you don't make your car payment, they come take your car. So essentially, it's the same thing. We pledge the asset. We pledge the asset that we're improving or fixing or building, and the banks agree that that they will lend us money based on that. The LGC makes sure that we don't ever default on a loan payment, so we still get really good rates. You would think that wouldn't make any sense, that a bank would say, "Wait a minute. Do you really think I'm going to foreclose on your courthouse? You think we're going to come take that away from you?" And although we're able to say put the courthouse or put one of our buildings up as collateral to do this, we get really good rates. They know they're not going to come take that building away from us, but they also know that the LGC is not going to allow us to default on a loan. So we still get really good rates, and it works out really well for us. So of that, again, last year, REI, Roof Engineering Incorporated, came in and did a program for us. They looked at all the county roofs. They gave us a program. They did an inspection and did an engineering analysis of what our roofs looked like. They gave us a capital improvement program spread over 10 years that said in year 1 you need to replace this roof. In year 2, year 3, year 4. They also gave us a maintenance piece that said every year you need to budget about this much for maintenance of these roofs. So what we did in our proposed borrowing package, we looked at this upcoming fiscal year, 17-18, and we also looked at 18-19 for our roof replacement projects and said, what do we need to do to get on track and to get these projects done? And there was $195,000 for the courthouse annex. There was $90,000 to replace the roof on the old jail. There's $105,000 to replace the roof on the Oakland building. And in 18-19, there is $418,000 to replace the Seaboard roof. There's $105,000 proposed in this borrowing package to pave or to fix and regrade and do whatever needs to be done and repave the Tideland building parking lot, the one that floods terribly. There's $115,000 in this budget, proposed in this budget to buy a generator that will service the entire Seaboard building. There were some issues with the existing generator in that it is not sized large enough to provide what we need in that building. That generator currently provides service for the 911 center and for all of our IT servers and our backups there. And back during the hurricane, we came very, very close to losing some of that because that generator was not sized appropriately to do what it needed to do. We had, Christina had an engineer come in and look at that and give us the right numbers on what it needed to be so that we would not run into that issue. IT folks have been standing on their head for the last couple of years about that because those are the servers that not only keep all of our financial information up and do all the things we need to do, but it is also the servers that keep Vic and his folks in operation on the 911 side. So that is something that is desperately needed. There's $33,000 to replace the modular unit out at the landfill, the scale house, that unit. And again, I talked about that earlier. Although this is a piece of capital expenditure that's under an enterprise fund, we are financing it under general fund, but there will be a debt service payment that comes out of the solid waste fund that would pay that debt service for that. So it is taking care of its own. $24,000 anticipated to be used to grade and pave the parking lot right here next door that serves the county attorney's building. That area is when it rains and when it gets bad, that washes something terrible. So it is something that probably needs to get paved and taken care of, and we can be done with that one. There's $490,300 proposed for the First Bank building rehab to convert that to the Financial Services Center. That's based on the estimate that we received from the engineer. There's $500,000 in this proposed borrowing package for courthouse improvements. Now, when I say courthouse improvements, as you all well know, we're dealing with some issues over at the courthouse regarding some of the structure and some of the membrane ceilings, some of the fire membrane that was in place or called for in some of the plans that we're not sure was ever in place originally. So of that, a portion of that is to do some spray fireproofing up in the jail area, and then also replace the ceiling grids throughout the rest of the building with fire-rated ceiling grids, and then to do some improvements that are needed in the jail itself. There is $100,000 in this proposed package for reinforcing the state Ponzer Tower, the Viper Tower in Ponzer. This is part of the radio project. As you're aware, when we brought forth the radio project, the state had agreed that we could use their Viper towers, which saves us a tremendous amount of money because we're able to get on their tower, we're able to use their generator, we're able to use their equipment room, their air conditioning, and all that. The structural engineers go in and do an analysis of the tower to determine what the loading is on the tower. And if if it's overloaded, then you've got to reinforce the tower before you can put more stuff on it. So obviously you can't do that until you get all the information. Our understanding from the state was they thought we'd be fine, but we obviously had to run those. We ran them. Originally, the Chocowinity Tower came in and they told us that the Chocowinity Tower was overloaded and we'd have to reinforce that one. They went back and reran it, and they had some additional conversations, and they said that the loading now stands at 98.3% on that tower, so we are not required to do any additional work on that tower. The one tower that is causing us a little bit of grief is the tower in Ponzer. Hyde County has recently put some equipment on that tower, and it's really interesting. The structural analysis of that tower shows that they ran two of them, one with the Hyde County equipment on it, and then or before and then after it. And before, it was loaded at 104.9%. Now, you would think that means it's overloaded, but actually the structural analysis says that you can go to 105.5%. So actually, the structural engineer said it's okay. After the Hyde County equipment is on there, and they're ahead of us, so they ran that one, the analysis on the structure comes back at 105.4%. Now, remember, the structural engineers say that on that tower you can go to 105.5. Well, the state is saying we're not going to let you go to 100. We're not going to let you go to 105.5. So technically it passes, but the state has said we're not going to let you get on there and take our tower to 105.4. You're going to have to reinforce that. We've put $100,000 in there. The estimate that we got for the Ponzer Tower is about $89,000 to reinforce that tower for us to get on there. And we put about $100,000. We're working this now. I'm not saying that's going to stay in here. We're working it in 3 different ways. Vic has done a great job in working that. So there are 3 different ways we're going to address that. We're either going to, exhaust all our options and have to use the reinforcement to get on there. There's a second method. Vic's applied for some 911 funding. They have additional funding, grant money, that they've applied for to say this is a perfect project for the state to help use some 911 money, some excess 911 money to reinforce that tower so that the state can put more stuff on it so that we can do it. So there's that opportunity. There's another opportunity is that what we may do is they're running the numbers on it, and the coverage maps right now is to use a combiner, which would essentially allow us to use Hyde County's equipment. You'd only have one piece of equipment up there, but you'd have a combiner that would allow you the radio signals to use the same piece of equipment. Now, when that happens, it degrades the radio coverage a little bit. So they're rerunning the coverage maps because not only does it need to meet what our needs are, but it also needs to meet what Hyde County had. We can obviously they would have to agree to allowing us to use a combiner on it. So we're working a couple of different paths on that. Worst case scenario is we have to go in and reinforce the tower. But again, just being able to use that tower saves us a tremendous amount of money, and we're able to use a couple of their towers. The HVAC project, we talked about at the community college in the storage area, and then I talked in detail about the community college, the public school system capital. So that's the $3 million proposed borrowing package. And I think that takes us through the expenditure side on a general overview, maybe a little deeper. Maybe you want to go to 9 again. Like Anita said, you haven't had your books, but an hour now, less than an hour. And it's been longer than that, sorry.
An hour and 25
Yeah,
minutes.
sorry about that. Been a little longer than that. Time flies when you're having fun. And the budget is a lot of fun for us. We spend a lot of time on it and enjoy doing that work. If you have questions, we'd appreciate those coming in. We can deal with them now, or as we get in. If we can get any of your detailed questions before the end of the week, we can get them. Yes, sir.
Out of the $59 million package budget that we got, I don't see anything in there that gives our county employees a raise.
The COLA is always a service expansion. We showed that last year as a service expansion, and as well as some other. I think 47 service expansions in there. We will show in the service expansion, we show a 1% COLA and we show a 2% COLA for the board to look at and determine if that's what they want to do. But the way I've always built budgets is that's always a policy decision by the board. So it's always listed as a service expansion. And it's something that the board would look at and determine if that's what they wanted to do, because it's not a part of continuation.
I would encourage each commissioner, as you start going through it, if you have a question, direct it to Anita and Brian, and then when they complete that, they're going to copy all the commissioners, so we'll be getting the same information as quick as possible. It's a lot of information. I know we've had privilege. We've had a little bit of a start as kind of an overview, but a lot of, I guess the budget workshops will really get down into the weeds on it.
That's your opportunity to get into the weeds.
But I think we can save ourselves a lot of time if we send questions to Anita and Brian and let them chase that and get back to us. So with that, I'm going to recess our meeting until next Monday, and that meeting will start at 5 o'clock. And then we'll have a meeting on Tuesday night, and that one will start at 5 o'clock. And then the following Monday, I believe, is that right, on the 30th, we'll come back, and that one will start at 5 o'clock. So just remember those times, and here again, we're not adjourning this meeting, we're just doing a recess.
Memorial Day.
Is the,
Yeah, Frank, Monday's Memorial Day. isn't it?
Well, is it the 30th or 31st?
Look at your budget schedule.
We,
I think we come on the 31st.
We come on the 30th and then June 1st.
Sorry about that.
is the 30th on Memorial Day weekend?
Tuesday. It's on the Tuesday.
On a Tuesday, okay. I'm sorry.
29th.
All right.
So it's Tuesday.
First.
Yeah, it's Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Okay.
Tuesday. Okay. Good night.